going on that would bring those two really technologies, heat treating as a technology, together?
Well, I'm kind of blanking on mode 3.
It's largely hierarchical core Lavalla.
So it's a possibility, I guess, from what I know of Lavalla, since it's a more complicated, much more complicated nabbing technique. Bless you. That it's a possibility that they were trying to heat treat to slow down their swing so that way they could be more accurate as they were prepping that core. Since that was technology, if I remember correctly, with a lot of core prep, so that way they could be more accurate. So I guess I could probably see a linkage between heat treatment and mode 3 technologies.
Yeah, it seems to increase the precision necessary for the technology.
Yeah, and I mean, as you're trying to slow down your swing, you can be more accurate where on the floor to take off that perfect Lavalla blade.
And sort of connected to that in part is an ancillary question. Given when we first see pyrotechnology that is pyrotechnology that is widely spread, and that also appears here in mode 3 times. Could you maybe address how that might fit the difference between harvesting fire from natural occurrences as opposed to creating and managing fire?
Well, I mean, in order to do heat treatment, you absolutely have to have control of fire. It can't be this haphazard trying to find fire wherever it occurs from a lightning strike or whatever. Because you really do need to be able to control fire, how much fuel you're using, how quickly are you heating, those types of things. So yeah, you absolutely need to have control of fire.
So there has to really be a predetermination of bringing those two technologies together.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. You know, another, in some ways a very basic question, but you know, what you found is the way you identify heat treating within an artifactual assemblage. How would you suggest this process be put into operation with a typical kind of archaeological investigation where you have either excavation or survey or testing, and you want to implement the research around heat treating? What would you need to do? How would you advise an archaeologist going into the field to pursue that process?
I mean, initially, I would love to say make sure you have a comparative collection so you have an idea of what the raw materials in the area that you're going to find, and then if you can have actual samples, try to heat some of them, so that way you kind of have a comparative collection of the raw versus heated, and then really, you know, see if these methods will work on your type of raw material. See if you can do a blind test to make sure that it works, and then when you have your assemblage, kind of try to initially sort out kind of how we usually do by color and whatnot, but then start taking pictures, running them into Adobe Photoshop, because it's very quick, very easy.
Okay. So you need to have this in mind really before you go into the field.
Ideally, yeah.
What should we do? Finally, a very, again, a kind of a simple question. You identified color and gloss.
Yeah.
Gloss.
Luster.
With caricature. And on the other variables that you looked at, you couldn't really see that much of a change.
Correct, for caricature.
Yeah, for caricature.
Yeah.
So, given what you found, what would be your guess as to how applicable
Well, are you meaning just the 2 that were positive, or do you mean all 5?
Yeah. But how about color, just the chemistry of color change?
Right.
I think that would be.
It would be pretty applicable, I mean, especially if you knew if there's a lot of iron or something in the elemental composition, because with the heat, it drives off water, it's oxidizing that iron, so it would be really good. Or if you knew if there was another mineral kind of in there that oxidizes as well, that changes color. So it would be pretty applicable.
Yeah. Well, really, nothing else to add. I think overall, it's really nice to sort of clear up some archaeological rumors relative to heat treating, and I think you've done a good job in addressing those.
Thank you.
So I pass the mic to someone else.
Brian, do you want the mic?
Just a couple of questions. Questions about the heterogeneity of the cube. It is not a nice, pristine, homogeneous isotropic system.
No, it's not.
It is a replacive diagenetic effect, elongating planes, nodular, these large blobs. You still have some fossil traces in there, so you're going to be changing material type. And you talk a little bit about, chalcedony versus true, what we would call true chert.
Yeah.
Something we would call navaculi.
Yeah.
What impacts do those have on your study? Does the fossil content, does any type of this variation impact the way the flakes are developing, or do the flakes form so quickly that they just ignore that heterogeneity?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So, fossil inclusions or bugs, I mean, all sorts of these things will interfere with force. And so some of it, does come down to how hard are you hitting it and whatnot. Now the question is, how does heat treatment then affect with some of that? Especially with that core research that Schmidt and his colleagues were looking at, was basically suggesting that as water's being driven off, the water is basically, it's changing into a gas, and so any of the particles that it was bonded with are then filling up those pores. And so that's what's actually making some of this smoother and easier to hit. So with the fossiliferous Keokuk, it didn't seem to affect so much, but I could definitely see like material like 4-acre, which is just riddled with it. I could see heat treatment maybe doesn't help quite as much on material like that. I mean, it would still probably benefit, but those, because of how prevalent that fossil material is, and it's also a little bit, in 4-acre, a little more crystalline in those fossils, that it's probably still going to cause issues.
The other question I had was thinking about the core that you have and the time frame that you're heating, the rate at which you're heating. You're trying to move water from the interior of the core out. This is the explosions that you were having. Are you looking at an edge effect on these cores so that it, let's play a middle game. We have a core that's maybe this big.
Right.
So that we heat it to 350 degrees centigrade for 10 hours. Well, what's the diffusivity rate of water gas moving out of that particular system? So are you seeing, in effect, a patina-like development of water-free chert surrounding water-rich chert where the water has not been able to diffuse outward? So when you bring it back down to temperature, you would go back to a liquidous state in the inclusions, in the interstices, and along grain boundaries, along crystal boundaries, where you have a dry zone. So when you strike, you may be effectively selecting along that boundary as a guide for your stress field migrating through the system. the basic idea, the basic question there would be, let's say we had infinite time. That'd be lovely. So when you heat this to 350 degrees C, we leave it in a vacuum oven at 350 degrees C for 10 years. Does that change the behavior versus one that has been 15 hours? We haven't changed anything other than the time.
Yeah. So.
Not quite the answer I wanted.
Yeah. I'm just kind of processing all this in because that was one of the concerns, you know, as we were going through and heating, and just making sure that, especially on those cut cores, that we were penetrating all the way in.
The temperature probably did penetrate all the way in.
And it did.
But the rate of the diffusivity, basically the conductivity, diffusivity of water out, may not have completely dried through the entire core.
That's, yeah. And that's a very realistic possibility.
There would be ways to test this.
Yeah, there are, and I know, I'm trying to remember, we went through like what the chemical, or the formula of what that is, because you can look at weight versus, you know, water and the rate of evaporation and whatnot. So we could absolutely probably run kind of a mathematical test just to kind of see.
That would be interesting to model, and that might be something to think about as just a brief statement of future work.
Yeah, okay.
These are the problems we had, these are things that we might find out.
Okay, and if you don't mind afterwards, because I've still got that formula, if we could talk a little bit more about that, I'd really appreciate that, because that's something I had kind of been toying with, since I'm not a geologist or a chemist. I definitely like a little bit of feedback on that, because we definitely did see kind of color change penetrate, but color change doesn't necessarily mean that all the water was driven out. It just means that enough of it was driven out to oxidize.
And we don't have a vacuum oven.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, that was one thing that we didn't discuss, was I did do thermogravimetric analysis. And with that, so in chert, we know that there's 3 different levels of water.
The little bitty guys.
Yes, the little itty bitty tiny pieces of chert. They're really cute and adorable.
If you put something this big in Dale's DTA, he would go bananas.
Here's the, but one of the things I found interesting with the DTA was that we recorded it by, we did a ramp rate of 1 degree a minute. And we held it all the way to 500 degrees Celsius, and then we held that temperature for an hour. And on a little itty bitty kind of piece, I mean super tiny, it was still even going down. I mean, it was petering out, it was slowing down the rate that water was coming out, but we didn't even hit, you know, all that tightly chemical bonded was not coming out, which that's one of my issues with Schmidt's work is, I don't know if it's maybe the type of material he's using, but he's like, oh yeah, this heavily covalent bonded water, we're getting that out, and I'm like, that's
There's a phrase we use that starts with a B.
I'm sorry?
There's a phrase we use about that. We starts with a B, ends with, has an S in there.
And I know we talked about this, and my brain just went, but yeah, I have it in my notes. We talked about it. I've got it in here. Absorption.
Yeah, absorption.
Absorption. I pulled it.
Because it would be, with this type of an experiment, you might be able to come up with a proxy for a desorption isothermy.
Okay.
For quartz of this crystal size, and then take that back to the standards of Keokuk or Veronica or like the Arkansas Navaculites, which I would expect to be very, very different
I would too.
creatures.
I mean, especially in its raw state, Navaculite is a whole different beast. So.
Okay, that's my question.
Can you tell us more about the heating, your heating trials and tribulations? And are those temperatures close to what we would expect in an actualistic study? So actually doing it with fuel instead of the kiln.
So part of the reasons why I stayed kind of on the lower end of temperatures as far as those go is because I was taking a look at some of Shepard's work in the 1980s, and she was a potter, and she did this whole series of studies on how hot natural fuels get and how long it can sustain those temperatures. And some of those materials can go much hotter, but then it can't hold that temperature, it can't sustain that temperature that long. And from some of the ethnographic records and evidence, as well as my own kind of heat treatment trials and tribulations, heat treating usually takes a while. It's not something that you can do very quickly, so it can take several days. So the idea of trying to heat at, 500 degrees Celsius, 1,000 degrees Celsius for days on end using wood, which even with that, there's softwood, hardwood, each one of these heat at different temperatures and burn for different times. So that's why I was trying to stay on the lower end. So I did try to keep into what would be more plausible in a natural open fire. And for my heating trials and tribulations, so I did do a pilot study initially on a different type of material, because originally I was going to try to use multiple, but I kind of burned out the natural supply of Florence A. chert for the size of pores I was trying to make in the pilot study, so that we had to scrap that. But I initially was trying to do that 50 degrees Celsius heating rate, holding it for a couple hours and then cooling off at that rate in the art department kilns, using cores that were kind of the same trapezoidal shape, but they weren't as long, and I was still getting massive explosions. And in fact, I even have one in my lab where basically the top came off as a giant pop lid centered around a crinoid fossil. So there's a few issues there. And I was kind of hoping that maybe it's just a fossil in the water, and his fossils hold different water, and that maybe it was just, random sample size of that. But really, when I was heating those whole pores, those whole plasts, you can't say that it's an issue of fossils when 8 cores blow up on you. Mm-hmm. And not just like, we fractured in half, but we're talking smithereens. I've got buckets. If anybody wants some heat-treated, pot-lidded chert, I've got lots.
So Brian brought up a great potential study. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about some studies that you might be thinking about in addition to water diffusing through infinite time?
Okay, I have thought about quite a number. So in addition to what we were discussing with color and luster of doing kind of a blind study and then tackling an archaeological collection, there was a couple other future research questions of, let's take this into a natural fire. And because that's one of the things that archaeologists have really struggled with. When you read the literature on heat treatment, they're always talking about how they're using sand baths, how they're digging a pit using sand, but we haven't found that archaeologically. And when we go to some of the early ethnographic accounts, they don't talk about using a sand bath. They talk about using wet earth to kind of create an oven or a kiln. So trying to do an experiment like that and seeing if we can still get some of the similar results. I think that would be really interesting and using, thermal couplings to see how does the heat disperse throughout wet soil, as well as, again, using various different fuel types, because I kind of love the fact that you can use hardwood, softwood, grasses, and the fact that people can use dung is just kind of mind-blowing. I don't think I would use that, but I just think it's kind of a fun, I might actually, but and then one of the things is investigating other possible reasons for heat treating. I was talking with my rock supplier, Craig Radsitz. His quarry basically at one point was an archaeological site, and he's been finding hammerstones all over his quarry, but the hammerstones are terrible quality. They're basically the limestone exterior that they were using, and even when you go into the river systems trying to find other rocks, you just don't find anything a lot better. And so if you're taking, and he has found things where it looks like they were using, you know, unheated material and using those really crappy cores or really crappy hammer stones trying to make stuff, but they were getting all sorts of flaws and mistakes. But if you heat it, then all of a sudden that hammer stone is working a lot better on that material. So trying to do something with that, trying to see if maybe instead of, you know, they were heating for this reduced fracture toughness, they were heating because of their other availability of the other tools.